If someone is asking a genuine question, like, what is a woman? I think that's completely fine to ask. I think that's what most people mean when they say gender is a social construct. It's the things that come with the gender, it's not the feeling itself. And if gender roles weren't really such of a big thing, this conversation wouldn't be as important. For instance, like the transgender conversation, I think a lot more people would be a lot more open to it, because if there was no societal expectation to being a certain gender, well, then no one would really care what you identify as, right? AiA episode 37. The question today being asked is, what is a woman? That seems to be something that is in the news this week, so I thought might as well cover it. Anyways, if you don't already know, Matt Walsh, someone from the Daily Wire, released a documentary that is simply titled, What is a Woman? Now, if you know anything about Matt Walsh, he is a self-described theocratic fascist, and he's also a very big conservative figure on the right that a lot of people seem to have mixed opinions on. But again, this is something that has gained a lot of popularity recently, so I decided to cover it. And it's a very controversial topic, so I'm going to try to be, very careful with my language here and try not to make some very strong statements about anything. But, anyways, let's just get into it. So I saw this, a couple days ago whenever it got released or whatever, basically like, it's from the Daily Wire, What is a Woman? And it's basically this documentary that Matt Walsh went around to certain people and talked to them. These are doctors, these are people that are transgender, people against transgenderism, with the likes. So again, I haven't really seen much of it. I haven't seen the entire documentary, but I have seen clips of the interviews because that's really what is sort of intriguing to me. I don't really want to sit down and watch a hour-half long documentary of Matt Walsh walking around. And, we obviously know what views he has. I have watched Matt Walsh for a while, so I know what views he has, and it doesn't really surprise me anything he says in the documentary. But anyways, you can probably find the documentary online for free on some sites. I've even seen it on YouTube a couple times, but again, wouldn't recommend giving money to the Daily Wire. But anyways, today we are reacting to two videos. We have one where this is an interview from the documentary itself. So from What is a Woman? Shocking interview from a professor. So basically this interview is under 2 minutes long. I didn't want to react to too long of a clip because I don't want to get copyright claimed or this video removed. So I will be pausing a lot, as I do normally, because normally when I watch videos, I can't keep my mouth shut. And also we have this video coming from Professor Dave Explains. So this video is titled, Let's All Get Past This Confusing About Transgender People. And both of these videos will be linked in the description down below, but this video is really good. I saw it this week and it absolutely amazed me. I think that Professor Dave Explains is really good at explaining things. That's what his channel is called. But he did really good with this video, but we're going to get into this video now. So this is with a professor, I think a gender professor. I've seen the interview before, but this was a couple days ago, so not exactly sure. So let's get into it.
So what is a woman?
Why do you ask the question?
I just really like to know.
So again, that's a good response. He'd like to know. And I think that's what a lot of people have been sort of having a problem with. I don't think it's wrong to ask questions, even though we know where Matt Walsh stands on this. We all know that. But if someone is asking a genuine question, like, what is a woman? I think that's completely fine to ask. And, we don't have a definition for that, then obviously we might need to fix that. But I don't think it's malicious on asking questions. I don't. But depending on the person it is, it could be seen in a very negative light. You know, the famous like Pepe meme of like just asking questions, one of those people. You know, that's where it could get into the negativity part. But again, I think asking a question is not inherently malicious. Continue.
What do you think the answer to that question is?
Well, I'm asking. That's why I came to a college professor who's this is what you do.
What other kinds of answers have you gotten?
I think this is also a big, I guess, problem here when it comes to this interview, when he's actually interviewing like doctors and stuff, because this person is a doctor right here. And when you're talking to people in academia versus a person in media, like Matt Walsh is, the person in media is always going to win the conversation because, again, they make a living off of talking to people and winning conversations. And even if Matt Walsh knows very little about the subject, which I think he does, but even if he doesn't know anything about it, he's going to be able to spin the conversation in his way and absolutely destroy this doctor or whatever he says. And I think you can kind of see it here because, you know, obviously the doctor is trying to sort of kind of throw the question back at Matt Walsh, let him answer it himself. But of course, Matt Walsh is going to keep throwing it back to the doctor and say like, hey, answer. And I think that's going to look like a really bad look for the professor, because it's going to look like the professor is avoiding the question because versus when someone in media, if you don't answer the question immediately, then you're automatically told like you're avoiding the question. So again, it's just something to keep in mind when watching this.
A lot of like this where you're not answering, and I've gotten a lot of that. So
I think it's interesting that you say that some of the people you've interviewed have been reluctant to answer it, and I think that has a lot to do with the questions that preceded it and the way that you've conducted yourself in the interview.
how have I conducted myself?
How do you think you've conducted yourself?
You just really don't want to answer the questions, do you?
I came today very willing and enthusiastic about answering questions about women's and gender sexuality studies, which is
So
the
you
work
wanted
that I do.
You wanted to answer questions about women's studies, and so shouldn't the first answer you should be able to provide is what exactly is a woman?
Well,
Well, I think the reason he's not going to straight out like just answer it is because he wants to hear of, you know, what answers have you got in the past of talking to people. And, you know, he's obviously probably not going to straight out answer it because, you know, as a professor, it's not like you're going to straight out, you know, answer every question your students have. You're going to throw them back the question and try to see where they can arrive at a conclusion to the question, because you know we could answer a lot of questions that we ask, or at least lead to that, and that's a lot more, I guess, powerful, you would say, than just asking someone the answer to it. So of course that's why it seems like this person, the professor, is avoiding the question, but in reality I think he is literally just being his professor self, or acting like a professor. But you also see it consequentially is Matt Walsh is acting like the media person he is.
well, for me, it's actually a really simple answer, and that's a person who identifies as a woman.
But what are they identifying as?
As a woman.
But what is that?
As a woman.
Do you know what a circular definition?
So this is important. He said, professor, that anyone who identifies as a woman. Matt Walsh says, what is that? And he says this is a woman. And now Matt Walsh brings up circular definition. And this is something that I saw today. So again, I just want to bring this up real quick. So I'm just going to look up woman definition right here. And this is just to show you how ambiguous language is. So right here, we have woman, and we have the definition of one, an adult female human being. And if we look at that definition on its face, an adult female human being, you know, the only thing ambiguous there would be female, right? Because we know what an adult is. An adult is, well, at least in the United States, is someone who's 18 or over. Human being is a person. So let's look up just female definition. if we don't know what that is, let's just look it up. So we have an adjective and a noun here. So an adjective of or denoting the sex that can bear offspring or produce eggs. So someone obviously with producing eggs, so who can have a kid, obviously. Distinguishing biologically by production of gametes. So it's obviously the size of the gametes. That's how we distinguish females and males biologically. The definition of a female used to be a little bit different, where we would basically distinguish between chromosomes, but now it's been kind of looked at as more gametes, because when you look at something chromosomally, they can have sort of, I guess, deviations of chromosomes, missing chromosomes, additional chromosomes, which can be fertilized by male gametes, which are the smaller and much more of them. And we also have the noun here, which a female animal or plant. That's pretty circular definition, don't you think? Because it has the word female in the definition for a noun. And if we're going by the adjective definition, well, that means any female who can actually produce children, which obviously not every female can. And I'm not just talking about females with medical issues or anything. I'm talking about females that haven't hit puberty yet. And I'm also talking about females who have already gone through menopause. That's a large group of the quote unquote female population that wouldn't be considered female anymore. And I think that's very important to kind of look at this definition, because not only is we're seeing right here is the definition circular, but we're also seeing right here that it's going to cut out a large group of the female population. And when you take all that into account, our definitions are not only very ambiguous, but also don't encompassing like all the quote unquote women we see in society. And again, that's the one thing you should probably take away from this video, is that the definitions and the words we use themselves in our language or in any language are very ambiguous, and we probably don't have them, nailed down to a perfect definition yet. Anyways, continuing with the video.
I do.
It's sort of like what you're doing right now, where a woman is a woman.
Mm-hmm. Well, because you're seeking what we would call in my field of work an essentialist definition of gender. I think it sounds like you would like me to give you a set of biological or cultural characteristics that are associated with one gender or the other.
I'm not seeking any type of definition. I'm just seeking a definition.
Yeah, and I gave you one.
I mean, if you're seeking a definition, personally, like looking at it online would make the most sense. And that's literally the definition he gave you, is that when he said the definition, a woman is someone who identifies as a woman, what is a woman? It is a woman. Yes, that definition is circular, but yet that's what it is online. And you thought by going to a professor that it would somehow give you a different definition than that. I don't think so. But anyways, we're getting into the next video here. This video is absolutely amazing. I definitely really am a big fan of Professor Dave Explains, but this video to me is really good about explaining transgenderism. Now, I might have some pushback in this video, of course, but anyways, let's get into it.
Hey everyone, I know I don't discuss current events too often, but I'd like to do more of that, and there's one thing happening at the moment that I feel compelled to comment on. Everybody seems to be furious about trans people. Half of us are furious that they exist, and the other half are furious about what the other half is saying. I would like to jump in and see if I can clear up some of the ways that people are talking past each other. Now, it's no secret that I'm a bit on the liberal side, but rest assured the left is not going to get away scot-free on this one. They're missing the mark on a few key points. But as tends to be the case, it's bigots on the right who are the main problem, so let's start there. The primary issue is people who deny transgenderism. These are the people who spew the tired Fox News talking points. Liberals say there are 89 genders and anyone can identify as a hamster, that sort of thing. It's a deliberate caricature of reality peddled by all the angry conservative dudes popping up in my feed lately who claim that nobody can define a woman. Let's all take a moment to acknowledge the problems that go along with the ambiguity.
And there we go. Language can sometimes be ambiguous. I 100% agree. And that was the one thing I said when looking up the definition of a woman and the definition of a female, is that the definitions themselves do not cover everything we consider to be a female or a woman. Because obviously, from this definition of a female, someone who can actually like get pregnant and have a kid, that doesn't include every quote unquote female that we would look at in society. I think that most people would agree that quote unquote women who, or females that cannot have kids anymore, have gone through menopause, are still females themselves. But yet this definition wouldn't necessarily cover that. Or you can look at it from the other perspective of just saying, oh, this female has not gone through puberty yet, so therefore they cannot have kids. Or you can look at a quote unquote female that does not have eggs or has medical issues to where they cannot have a kid. And again, all of those we would consider to be females, but yet by the definition, they wouldn't be under it. So again, language is ambiguous.
Of language. Sex and gender are different words that refer to different things. If you did not know that, now you do. Sex is a chromosomal phenomenon. Nearly all of us have 2 sex chromosomes in all of our somatic cells. If both are X, your sex is female. If one is X and one is Y, your sex is male. There are interesting exceptions, like intersex people who exhibit a blend of the phenotypes associated with the 2 sexes due to chromosomal irregularities, as well as chimeric beings who exhibit different genotypes in different cells due to developing from more than one zygote. It is important to discuss and understand these populations. However, we can still safely categorize the overwhelming majority of people as exhibiting either male or female sex. Gender is a different phenomenon. It is still biological, but it is a neurochemical construct. This means that ultimately it is still genetic in basis, but it absolutely is not determined merely by the sex chromosomes. It is tremendously more complicated, and researchers are still working to understand the biological basis of gender identity. Human psychology is complex. People need to deal with that. Thoughts and feelings are ultimately chemical phenomena. We all have a neurochemical profile that guides how we think and feel, and part of that is gender identity. The reason that we are just now becoming equipped to differentiate between the 2 phenomena is that in the vast majority of humans, somewhere between 99 and 99.9% of all people, gender identity aligns with biological sex, hence the term cisgender. Cis is a prefix that means same. But for that remaining fraction of a percent, which totals to millions and millions of people all over the world, their gender identity is the opposite of their biological sex, hence the term transgender. Trans is a prefix that means opposite. The unfortunate linguistic coincidence is that we use terms like man and woman, or male and female, in describing both of these phenomena. That is where the confusion arises.
And I totally 100% agree with that, and pretty much everything he said at this point. But yes, most people don't know that there's a difference between using male, female versus man or woman. And again, it's just the ambiguity of our language is really showing, because we use these phrases or these words in the same context as each other. That's why so many people are confused with what is sex, what is gender, aren't they the same thing? You know, how can they not be the same thing? They've always looked at it the same, but if we actually look at the definitions, they are different, and they're completely different.
When people insist that one term must encapsulate both phenomena at once. So when someone asks, what is a woman, expecting to get a very simple answer that children can understand, they are sorely mistaken. The answer requires a discussion of genetics and neurochemistry. Therefore, when people complain about men choosing to be women, this is very offensive. It is a denial of the concept of gender. It is no different than the conversation that was happening surrounding homosexuality a few decades ago. Conservatives would say that homosexuality is just demons or temptations from Satan, and that heterosexuality is the only way people can truly be. Today, this seems totally ridiculous because homosexuality and other sexual orientations have become accepted and normalized, even among many conservatives. The same will happen for transgenderism because it undeniably exists. The acceptance for suppressed sexual orientations came first because around 10% of people are gay, whereas a much smaller percentage of people are trans. But this is the natural progression of societal evolution. Nearly every binary has been shown to actually be a spectrum, and it doesn't matter how uncomfortable it makes conservative people. Society will continue to shift until our language and policies reflect actual human nature, not the tiny puritanical box that has historically been thrust upon us. Now, as promised, with the indictment of conservatives complete, I turn to liberals and the missteps they are enacting that are preventing resolution.
So, at least for the conservative section of the video, I agreed with pretty much everything he said. There was no reason to really pause over it and say, like, hey, I disagree with this. But, the couple times I did, 100% agreed with what he said. As for the liberal side, there might be some points where I disagree here, but I think most of the points he makes are very valid, and I would agree with them because I have seen this video and I know what's coming up. But anyways, let's get into it.
Number one, please stop saying things like gender is a social construct. No, it is.
This I have to agree with, honestly. But the reason he explains it, we'll have to go into it. So let me just let him finish explaining, then I'll go into it.
It's not. It is a biological construct. Society can't turn you trans any more than it can turn you gay. Gender is determined biologically. It is simply that, again, gender is not determined merely by the sex chromosomes and is an incredibly complex neurochemical phenomenon. So let's talk about it honestly. Gender roles are a social construct.
100% agree with this. And I think that's what a lot of people mean when they say gender is a social construct, because I don't think they're talking about the actual feeling of gender. They're mainly talking about the things that come with being a certain gender. And gender roles like this, whatever it might be, for a woman being feminine and, liking things such as art, beauty, makeup, drinking, whatever, and a guy, for instance, would like lifting, computers, and money. But I think that's what most people mean when they say gender is a social construct. It's the things that come with the gender. It's not the feeling itself. At least that's what I know I've meant, because I have said gender is a social construct in the past. But again, maybe I should clarify my language and say gender roles are a social construct. And if gender roles weren't really such of a big thing, this conversation wouldn't be as important. For instance, like the transgender conversation, I think a lot more people would be a lot more open to it, because if there was no societal expectation to being a certain gender, well, then no one would really care what you identify as, right? Because you could identify with whatever you want and people would be like, oh yeah, you just, you're just a person at that point. And do I think society would be a lot better like that? Like being a sort of gender abolitionist? I'm not 100% sure, because I don't think we've lived in a society like that yet, at least through history. So I guess we'll have to wait and see, but it seems to be we're kind of like, I don't know, almost heading there in this way, kind of being gender abolitionist, abolishing these gender roles to where either if you're a man or a woman, you can just basically live your life how you want to live it. And there's no expectation on how to live it, which is a lot more freedom, but I don't necessarily know if it is the best thing to do.
That all men must be this way and do these things, and all women must be this way and do these things. That is a social construct, and it is one that became obsolete immediately upon evolving beyond a hunter-gatherer society. It has only persisted due to deeply rooted misogyny and the desire to treat women as private property. Rage against gender roles as a social construct all you like. I'm right there with you. But stop saying that gender itself is a social construct. It is biological. In addition, sex is a much more easily definable biological construct, and we must acknowledge that when an individual that is of the male biological sex identifies as trans, their biological sex remains male. By identifying as trans, their chromosomes do not change, no matter what surgeries they choose to undergo.
And this I've 100% agreed with, like, every time someone has said it. I remember I had the, I think it was AiA episode 21, where I had a conversation with a hardcore social conservative about gender, and obviously transgenderism was a big topic there. And I acknowledged multiple times throughout that conversation, as you know, it doesn't matter what you identify as, your biology is always going to be the same. And I know people have made the arguments like, oh, you can actually change your biology. Well, until we can actually like change our biology on the chromosomal level, which I don't think we can at this moment, I think it doesn't matter who you are. If I identify as a woman right now, I'm always going to be a biological male. There's nothing I can do about that. But again, I think that, you know, in our very progressive society, we look at someone's gender as how they identify as in society, because that is more of the social thing. Even in itself, if we look up, you know, just to show you I'm not absolutely crazy here, but if we look up the gender definition, it's either one of the two sexes, especially when considering or reference to a social and cultural differences. So even social is typically in the definition of it, and it seems to be, you know, no mention of biology in the definition itself. Social or cultural difference betweens, and again, it says rather than biological ones. So even in our progressive society, we look at someone's gender as what they identify as, and that's how we address them versus what they do as their biology. Because again, it's very hard to know everyone's biology. That, yeah, typically men look a certain way and women look another way, but that's also due to gender roles. And if we didn't have so many gender roles itself, it would be a little bit harder to identify people what is their biology, if, you know, men were a lot more like, you know, I guess wearing whatever they want and not adhering to gender roles. Same thing with women. It would get a lot more difficult. So that's why we identify or address someone as their gender. But we know, no matter what, that their biology is never going to change, at least at this moment we are in history.
We rightfully refer to them as women because most of us have decided that it is appropriate for a society to respect their gender identity over their biological sex as a linguistic formality. If one's sex is male and their gender is female, why not refer to them as female and address them as they wish? This is a simple and obvious courtesy, but their sex does not change, nor is their transgenderism selected. When liberals attempt to decouple gender or even sex from its biological basis, they give conservatives license for mockery, because they can then rightfully criticize what seems to them like a vague and meaningless declaration. That's why smug, ignorant conservatives who make a living stirring up hatred amongst bigots get so much traction by cutting together cherry-picked compilations of young people saying silly things, like gender is a social construct, because they get to go look at the dumb liberals, and it is a rare instance where they aren't completely wrong. This emboldens them and makes them feel justified in pushing other talking points that are completely wrong. And finally, on a cultural note, I think that we need to stop flipping out about innocuous things that comedians say.
Totally
Let us
agree with
reserve
this.
our anger for those who are in denial of science and are attempting to limit human rights. When someone attacks Dave Chappelle on stage in my town of Los Angeles in the wake of controversy surrounding alleged anti trans rhetoric, and he, off the cuff, shouts, "It was a trans man," that's not a hateful remark. He was reacting to the situation, which is what comedians do. You are free to decide for yourself whether or not you find any particular comedy to be funny. Comedy is subjective, but whether or not something should be deemed offensive has an element of objectivity to it, and that remark does not qualify. I'm not here to do an in-depth analysis of all the alleged anti-trans jokes from all the comedians on Netflix, as I haven't even heard all of them, but in general, let's just tone it down a notch. Additionally, regarding the controversy with sports, trans women who have gone through puberty as males, experiencing the dramatic hormonal changes characteristic of any sexually dimorphic species, objectively have an unfair biological advantage over female athletes. I
Agreed.
personally couldn't care less about sports and who is competing against whom, but people who say that trans women have an unfair athletic advantage are absolutely correct.
Yeah, at least to get to this point. So he brought up the point about comedy, which, my take on comedy, it's always been the same as you should be able to say what you want. I think that comedians of all people should be exercising the freedom of speech and being able to make jokes about whatever they want, whether that's like rape, murder, transgender people. Damn it, I said the R word, so this video is absolutely be demonetized. But it doesn't matter what they joke about. I think that they should be able to make a joke about whatever they want. And I don't think that they should be limited to, saying whatever they want on stage, because again, when it really comes down to it, they are providing entertainment, and it's just entertainment at the end of the day.
And to deny this makes any objections to transphobia totally meaningless, because you are refusing to acknowledge what trans people are. As to where trans women should compete, I don't have any solutions because, again, I don't care about sports. But there is a reason that men and women do not compete with one another in almost any sport. So if you are a fan of sports, try to respect that. And that's the end of my rant, which I felt compelled to write.
So I guess that's where we'll end the video there for Professor Dave. But anyways, I guess to hit on the final point of the video, which was about sports, I totally agree with his take that men and women shouldn't be competing against each other. I guess it really also depends on the sport. When it comes to like physical sports, I don't think they should. But I guess when it comes to non-physical sports, I guess there wouldn't be any reason why they couldn't. Like, for instance, like esports, video games, or like chess, for instance. I don't exactly know if it's considered a sport, but I guess when it comes to non-physical sports, I wouldn't see really much of a problem there. But yes, when it comes to physical sports, men seem to have an advantage over women. And if trans women were competing in sports, they would have an unfair advantage. And it just shows for the data. You can look at data for any sport, and it shows this, that men have an advantage over women. Testosterone makes a massive difference, and that just seems to be how it is. But anyways, that's about it for this video and for What is a Woman, obviously. Both of these videos will be linked in the description down below. And I'm sorry I couldn't provide, obviously, a definition of a woman, because again, I wanted to be very careful with my words in this episode, and I want to say straight out, I don't have a solution for the definition. I'm just some guy who makes internet videos. I don't have a definition that's going to encompass all women or all females in just one definition. This is obviously something that we're going to have to go back and forth with many intelligent people and see what they can come up with, because obviously I hoped I can show in this video that the definitions themselves and the language we use is quite ambiguous, and when using it, we kind of have to know when we ask these questions is that maybe we can't answer it. Maybe right now, as a society, we can't answer what a woman is, or our definition of a woman is basically not encompassing all women that we sort of look at in society, quote unquote women, obviously. But anyways, that's about it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, see ya.